Hi, I'm Alana. Welcome to another video. In today's video, we're doing a get ready with me for church. So, what have I been up to lately? Well, I've still been watching, I mentioned last week, this YouTube channel called Soft White Underbelly. And so I've been, listening to a lot of interviews from them still. So basically, like as soon as the day is over, I will turn on Soft White Underbelly and listen to interviews until I go to sleep, until I fall asleep. So if you did not see my last Get Ready With Me for Church, Soft White Underbelly is a YouTube channel run by a photographer called Mark Laita, and on it he basically interviews different people and just like lets them tell their stories. So he interviews a lot of homeless people, a lot of like drug addicts and sex workers, and he just kind of gives them a platform to tell their story. And they're all such fascinating stories. Like several of his videos have over 1 million views, so they're all really good. And so I've been listening to them still. So the other night I listened to one with this man named Frederick. And so Frederick was this guy who he was molested by an older man. I can't remember the man's name, but he was molested and raped by this man when he was a child. And then like obviously he spiraled into drug addiction and like started hanging out with bikies and stuff like that, just trying to deal with the trauma of it. And then one day he decided that like he'd had enough and he had to put an end to this. So he went to the man who raped him as a child. He went to his house and like beat him up, and then he slit his throat. And so then, and he says in the interview, like, people would ask me, did that fix all your problems? Like the moment when you slit his throat and killed him, did that solve all your problems? And he was like, no, it didn't. It just compounded all of my problems because now I've murdered someone. And so then after that, he was arrested and taken to jail, and his mum's pastor told he and his mum to meditate on the number 5 to try and get him 5 years for murder. And so he was like, well, that's ridiculous. Like, I've literally slit someone's throat and murdered them, so I'm not going to get 5 years. I'm going to get so much more than that. But his mum and his mum's pastor told him, like, no, you need to keep your faith and believe in a miracle right now. And then he found out one of the guards in the jail told him that outside, like, everyone had bumper stickers saying Free Clark on their cars because the man who he killed, like, he wasn't the only boy who he raped. The man who he killed had raped tons of boys and was still raping boys. And everyone knew that he was a monster, but they didn't have any evidence to convict him. So when Clark murdered this guy, everyone thought he was like a hero, basically, because this man was a monster who'd been raping boys for years. And so the whole town like rallied around him. And then when he went before the judge literally gave him 5 years because they took into consideration like everything that had happened and like all of the circumstances, and it's not like it was a random act. And this man was such a monster that, you know how when a police officer dies they like fly the flag at half-mast? They literally were told to not do that for this man because he was such a monster. Oh yeah, the man who raped him, he was a lieutenant, like a police officer. The man who raped like loads of boys. So So Clark thought that everyone was going to think that he was a monster for slitting this guy's throat, but actually everyone thought he was basically like a hero because he put an end to all of the abuse that this lieutenant police officer had been doing for like years and years and years. So then when he was in prison, he only spent, I think he spent less than 5 years in jail in the end, and he started reading the Bible, and God said to him, "You're going to be a motivational speaker." And he was like, "What? Like, I have a felony conviction. I've been to prison. I'm not going to be a motivational speaker." And then when he got out of prison, people started asking him to speak in their churches and in schools and jails. And he was like, "Wait, what? You want me to speak?" Because he had such an incredible story from like his life, like suffering this abuse and then ending up having to like take it into his own hands and murder this man. And so he started speaking in schools and jails, and then eventually some like speaking agent saw him and they were like, "We would like to represent you as a motivational speaker." And this was like less than a year after he got out of prison. So yeah, that was Clark Frederick's story. I thought it was a really beautiful story of redemption. And then what other stories did I hear? Oh, and then I heard this one story with a man who, so Mark Laita, the photographer who runs this channel, he interviews like a lot of people, like anyone who has an interesting story, he will interview. And so I listened to this one interview with a man who actually was a sex offender himself. His name was Marshall, and he was like in his 70s or something. And he told his story of how he molested his own daughter when she was 6 years old, and he also molested a neighbor girl. And like he told his story of how he came to do that, and how he molested and raped his daughter and a neighbor girl for years, and then he finally got caught and went to prison for it. And like he seemed like the strangest person, because like how does someone even come to be doing that? And he explained that like, "Oh, well, I guess that I was just not really aware of the damage that it would cause to the victim. You know, I was just thinking of myself." But it's still really difficult to comprehend how someone comes to be doing that. And that was a really interesting interview with Marshall, the sex offender. And he talked about how after he went to prison, he did this program called Arcadia, which is like a sex offender program for sex offenders, where they teach you like why you shouldn't molest your daughters, I guess. And he talked about how that was a really helpful program for him, and he learned a lot. And he understood now that like we shouldn't molest our daughters or other children because it's really damaging to the victims. And so that was a really interesting story to listen to. He said that Arcadia helped him a lot, like helped him see other people's perspectives. He seemed a bit surprised and confused that his daughters still don't talk to him. He said that they would write to him sometimes when he was in prison, but since he got out of prison, they didn't talk to him. And I was like, that shouldn't be surprising to you. Like, you raped everyone. But I think my favorite interview that I listened to last night was probably with this guy who, his name was Philip. His name was Philip, and he was a sex addict. And I love this one. Philip was, I think he's in his 50s now, and he talked about how he's a white man. He just like an average looking white man, and he talked about how he really loved like having sex with black men. He actually spoke in detail about how he really loved having sex with black men. Like he loved like being dominated by black men, and he spoke about how he'd had a few he called them he called them master slave connections, where you have a, I guess, connection with someone where you were their slave, he was their slave. And so he had he had one master called Master Roderick, and they were in a connection called a he said in the BDSM community it's called a total power exchange, TPE, total power exchange. So he just loved like being owned and dominated by big black men. And he talked about how like he felt really really just like happy and fulfilled by having all of his holes filled. And he explained to Mark Laita what a spit roast is, and he was like, yeah, so you know, when a pig is on a spit roast, say I would be the pig in the middle, and then I'd have a big black man on either side. And so he spoke so like graphically and passionately about his sex addiction, and I think that was my favorite episode that I listened to last night, Philip, because he sounded like a really sweet, like really innocent, beautiful soul. And it was really fun to listen to his passion for sex. And he spoke about how like he said he's had sex with at least 900 guys in total, and 800 of them have been black. And Mark was like, what is the most people you've had sex with in one day? And he said, well, he said, one time I had sex with 8 different men in like a 6-hour period. And I was like, whoa, that's, you know, pretty impressive. And so this man just spends his whole life like looking for looking for black men to have sex with. And I mean, good on him, you know, good on him. I found Philip's story really really fun, because like I've not heard someone that speak that openly about their passion for rampant gay sex with black men. And so I really enjoyed that episode. And all of these interviews got me thinking about how people come to like how we deal with the things we have done. Like there were also a few interviews with OnlyFans girls or former OnlyFans girls. And so it got me thinking about how we deal with the things we have done. Like when we do bad things, how we handle that and come to terms with that. And so the Bible teaches that it's not you that does bad things, it is the sin in you. So yeah, so then last night I had a dream about someone who I have known and loved for a really long time, and I haven't actually spoken to him in a really long time. Like I haven't actually spoken to him in years, but we were like best friends in year 6, and then he has basically fallen off the earth just because he struggles. And I had a dream about him last night, and in the dream he was smoking bongs and like trying to handle all of the bad things that he'd done. And I went up to him and I said to him, it is not you that does these bad things or that did those bad things, it is the sin in you. And then I hugged him. And so the next time that you feel overwhelmed with guilt over all of the bad things that you have done, just remember that it's not you that did those bad things, it is the sin in you. So hope that's helpful. Thank you for getting ready with me for church today. You're beautiful, you're perfect, I love you. God bless you. If you're new, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel.